Good morning, friends. While they put this slides up, I'll just take a minute to give that. I'm going to talk about the 30,000 feet level innovation and where the ecosystem is. And many of you come from very different industries, and I'm so glad to see a data scientist here as well. So I'm going to talk about how some of these different industries are influencing the healthcare industry and how the innovation ecosystem has evolved and how we can learn from each other. So it was also good to follow up with Dr. Mishra because he comes from an innovation-based, technology-driven institute. And so I'm going to give you a little perspective on Charles Darwin and why his quote is relevant even today. It's not just relevant from different organisms, but also from any technology, any country. So it's not just the strongest of the species that survives, but also not the most intelligent, but one which is most adaptable. So I think you can relate, many of you, even including startups or corporates, can relate to it. If you do not adapt to change, you will perish. So everyone, including individuals, as a person, your personality needs to adapt to the change. I will also give a little perspective on some of the revolutions which has happened over time. So just giving you a perspective of how these technologies have evolved and why it is also related to healthcare. So the reason I am presenting this is that I want to broaden your horizons to think out of the box and also not just think about what you're doing today, but where the industry is heading or where it's not heading or what really shapes the healthcare industry as well. So some of the revolutions it started was the Industrial Revolution, started by the Britishers, moved on to the steam and railway. Again, this was in Britain. And it moved to the other parts of the continent, which was the steel and heavy engineering, which was in US and Germany. And soon it was into the automobiles. And automobiles then gave rise to the, eventually to the information technology. So this is where the era is right now. But this particular, the information and the telecommunication has touched basically every other industry, including healthcare. And that's why this is really critical for us to really see how these evolutions have happened and how it affects the industry. And the latest and the greatest is, the healthcare and the AI is where it's heading and how it affects our industry as well. So, I want to also give you a little high-level perspective on innovation clusters. So innovation clusters, why some of these clusters happen. And some of them we assume that this was always there. But just to give you a history on how these happen and why it's important for us to understand this and what's happening in India as well. So a little perspective of some of these game-changing events again. Apart from the revolutions that we had, where the origin of Silicon Valley, the origin of biotechnology. I don't know how many of you have that background, but we know the PCR was the origin, but what really was the background behind it? And of course, in this past century, we have the PayPal mafia as well. So just to give you a perspective of how the Silicon Valley originated, was that most of these industries were especially in US, a lot of the industry was funded by the government. And this was in the defense sector, so a lot of money was put in the defense sector. And if you see this first, the vacuum tubes, back in the early 20th century, it was 1910, is when the World War I had happened. And so the Japanese were the leaders in that. And the US government needed a lot of the communication network to be able to communicate, and that's when they put in a lot of money into the defense. And this particular defense, in order to expedite the evolution, so they gave the technology also to this for civilian purposes to Bell Labs, if you all know the Bell Labs from AT&T, and also Stanford and MIT, which eventually gave rise to the microwave technology. And so that's how some of these technology then gave rise to integrated circuit. And Mr. Shockley, who was also a Nobel laureate, who originated then later into the Shockley semiconductor, he formed Shockley Semiconductor, and 8 of these gentlemen on the right were part of the Shockley Semiconductor. And some of these later left the Shockley Semiconductor and formed the Fairchild Semiconductor. which eventually formed Intel. And some of these gentlemen also were the originators of the now venture capitalist industry. And so these folks were the ones who gave rise to all this. If you see in the background, this is the small Bay Area, and how some of these technologies like the Sun, the SAP, the HP, all these can trace back their origin to these 8 gentlemen. And if you see, the Fairchild Semiconductor now has given rise, if you map it out, to Apple and the Googles of the world, and they created a whopping 2.1 trillion economy, and of course it's growing. So what you see is, how some of these, just one particular technology can give rise to, several other startups, as well as you can move the technology and the countries. So the entire country of United States has been so innovative. You can trace back the origins to some of the core technology which originated either in universities or in some of these labs, and eventually startups as well. So how it can shape industries. So again, in this particular century, it's the PayPal mafia. So Elon Musk is one of the trailblazers. So if you really trace back, so these guys were the original founders of PayPal. And they eventually formed many, many different the new industries, including the LinkedIn. And they not only created this, but they also helped each other. So when you are meeting over here. So what your onus is that you work with each other, help out each other, because you never know what's the next breakthrough coming in. And if you help each other, this is where the country's economy also gets pushed. But overall, as a person as well, you grow as an individual and grow your own. That's also your growth story. So do go to this particular link. It can actually trace back which of these founders started what. So this is a very neat map if you go to this particular web link. So now going on to our current industry, including biotechnology and some of the medical devices. So biotechnology, I think we all know, it's started with the PCR. But where did it originate? It was these 2 gentlemen, professors, Stanley Cohen at Stanford and Herb Boyer from UCSF. So they were at a conference having a beer. And they talked about each of the technologies that they're working on. One was basically extracting E. coli, and the other person was how this splicing occurred. So I don't want to get into what really happens in PCR, you all are aware. But that particular conversation then led to this entire industry. And Stanford at that time was, of course, into the not-for-profit. And they said that this technology is a game-changing technology. We would not have an exclusive license for this for any one particular firm. We want to do a non-exclusive license. And that is when they gave this technology not just to Genentech, but an entire industry, which was the origin of the biotechnology. So this eventually formed the human insulin, and which was then licensed out to Eli Lilly at that point, and gave rise to the entire the artificial form of insulin. So moving on to the innovation ecosystem. What exactly is innovation ecosystem? So I've given you the examples of how Silicon Valley occurred, but what constitutes it? What are the different stakeholders? Or what really drives it. So this was just a very high-level perspective of which of the nations are really innovative. I mean, of course, we know that United States is innovative, but on top of it is 2 other nations. And of course, these numbers move back and forth over years. So Switzerland, Sweden, it was Denmark and Finland at one point. United States was never the most innovative, but some of these parameters here on the right are what constitutes the most innovative countries. And so these are knowledge and technology outputs, institutional structures, infrastructure. So all these different elements constitute the innovation output. And where does India stand? I think we all know it's not really great, but I still have a lot of hope for India, and it is growing. So India is pretty sad 53, but with our push from the government and various stakeholders, it will climb up pretty soon, and it is climbing. And as I show in my different slides going forward, it is climbing in terms of what we are doing and how the technology is leapfrogging in India. So these are the different clusters across the world. Of course, we are very well known. Bangalore is very well known for IT. And of course, Hyderabad is very well known for pharma. So I will talk a little bit about all of these as I go along in my slides. So So I want to give you a little perspective on Korea. You know, this little country like Korea or Israel, how did this become an innovative nation? So Korea, you know, I think we all know the chaebol, which is basically, you know, these companies which were government-sponsored or government-supported. And Korea used to be known, I mean, I think there's very few millennials here and a lot of, you know, the Gen Z folks who don't know that Korea used to be called as the low-quality copycat nation, you know, what China is also known, but we know that China has evolved. So, you know, we, I think, are sort of emulating some of these countries in terms of making the generic drugs or things like that, but we are evolving. So just wanted to give you a little, you know, perspective on this. So Korea is not just known for firms like Samsung, which, and you know, a lot of folks would not know that Samsung started as a grocery store. How many of you know that Samsung started as a grocery store? Probably not. So Samsung started as a grocery store, moved to textiles, and eventually, you know, moved into the sweet spot, which was the semiconductor industry. Now, Korea and Taiwan are known for some of the technologies in the semiconductor industry, including, you know, some of the most innovative technologies now. There was a time when the cars, Kia and Hyundai, nobody wanted to buy it because they were low quality and low cost. So what the Korean government also did, and you would wonder why I've put the K-pop's, the picture out there, was that the government also to, you know, remove the image of Korea being as a very shoddy country, they invested or they put in money into some of the music industry as well, including supporting groups like K-pop, very strategically, and now we know what we know as Korea as a very savvy and innovative nation is all because the strategic investments and drive from the government to drive it. And I see a lot of similarities in what India is doing as well, in investing strategically in key sectors and also in the image of the country. So just moving on, you know, this is where we are. So we used to be known as Jugaad country, right? So we would try to put things, do things last minute, but I think we've moved on from being the Jugaad country to what we are now. We are known for IT, we're known for our drugs, the generic drugs, and we, of course, really, you know, surpassed the entire world's expectations in really sending our satellites to Mars. So that was like really exceptional. So we are moving on. So I think we shouldn't be ashamed of what, you know, even if we do copy things, it is totally fine because it's what we're learning. But we are moving up the value chain. And so this is where I wanted to give a little highlight. And also about, you know, since I'm talking about the, you know, innovation clusters, you know, of course, Bangalore is the IT cluster. And how even Hyderabad became the pharmaceutical sector was that, you know, I think most people don't have that insight that there used to be, well, a government-sponsored institution called IDPL, the Indian Drug and Pharmaceutical Limited. And I think now it doesn't exist anymore. It's in Sanat Nagar, Balanagar area. And this is where a lot of the founders of Dr. Reddy's labs, then Aurobindo and Natco, all of the the founders worked over there. And the government had strategically invested or gotten Russian technology to start some of these, to jumpstart our drug and pharmaceutical sector. And some of these founders moved on from the IDPL to form some of these firms. And this is where this pharmaceutical capital happened to be in Hyderabad. So just to give you a little history lesson there as well. So what exactly is a business model? Since I see quite a few startups here, and even it applies to, you know, big firms. And so we shouldn't just rely on our core technology, but we should be looking out for newer horizons. And this is what I wanted to give you a little perspective on, you know, to not have your blinkers on, but to look out for, you know, the different stakeholders to work with to network. So like I said, what are the innovation ecosystem stakeholders? It's the early stage innovators, which is the research institutions, which then moves on to the incubators and angel investors and venture capitalists supported. But also from a huge amount of money comes from the government. And just to give you a little perspective on, you know, why, you know, government is really important. And also most of the drugs, from any of the big Mercks or Pfizers. None of them actually originated in any of these firms. They can trace back all the origin of these drugs and pharmaceutical back to the university labs. So not a single drug in the history has ever been, has come out from any of these firms. They were supported in development and the later part of the clinical trials, refinement, but the origins were from the universities and the incubators, if I may say. The private companies, which is the last, this thing doesn't work, but the last bit there is the private companies, which is where the scalability comes in. So the right part of the graph, if you really see, is that these early stage research happens, which is where mostly the push of the technology happens. Now the pull and the scalability comes in only when the commercial partner comes in, and that is where you see the technology push on the right side gets moved on, and those are the more successful technologies which get adopted by the market forces. So here is again another depiction. This is our perceived quality. Let's say I am a researcher, I'm a scientist. I think this particular drug is $1 billion worth. That is my perceived. So here's your perceived quality. I don't know how clear it is from behind, but then but then you face the reality, and all of a sudden you are actually perception, the market size drops, and ultimately what really, and that's when, if you are able to get over the chasm, the value of debt is what it's called. So if you're able to get over the chasm, and then that's when you have a successful, a sustainable business model, and that moves on. So some of these innovators, I'm not going to dwell more on this, but I just want to move on. So you need to also constantly innovate. I think many of you don't know, at least the back of the audience may not know that these were the cassette recorders. And if you did not reinvent, it went on to the Walkmans and the CD players. And now we know the entire industry has changed because of the MP3 players or how the Apple Music came in. So you have to constantly innovate. So this S-curve of innovation, you constantly need to be at the curve, at the the growth stage in order to move on to the next set of technology. You cannot be relying on your existing. So this is the red part is your core business, and that's where you're executing right now. But what you need to look at is emerging and what is unknown. What is unknown out there is what I need to be aware, because my rivals could be, from tech firms. So right now, the pharmaceutical or the medical device industry is very complacent. But we know that the tech players can come any day, only because we know that now. But 5 years back, we didn't know which of these tech players would be in the healthcare marketplace. So that is where you need to be aware of the unknown and be cognizant, and your growth of any industry or firm or as an individual as well. You need to be aware of all these different factors. So this is where I was talking. You are talking about electric vehicles. So Tesla is investing a lot into electric vehicles. Then there is the driverless cars. But what if tomorrow the entire industry shuts down? The people stop buying car. So how can you be aware about all these different factors so that you can take that into factor when we are designing your business models or your product strategy as well? So these are the different stakeholders of the healthcare ecosystem, starting from the hospital. So which part of this ecosystem are you? Telemedicine person or a startup or a industry. So which part of it, and also which part of this healthcare continuum are you addressing? Is it a healthy individual? Is it a child? Is it a family? So the needs of each of this, including the quality of the care as well as the spend on each of these individuals here is very, very different. So the right part of that, of the graph is basically your how much of the spend, healthcare spend, happens in each part of this particular care continuum. So as a startup or as a OEM or I need to know who I am, who is my customer, or who I'm addressing, who is this need being addressed for. So these are the different types of business model. And the reason I'm trying to give a flavor of a lot of different industry is that, as healthcare, the minute I become very, very healthcare centric, I stopped looking at what's happening in the other industry. And the newer form of business models are not within your industry. Because if you're working on a Me Too product or a Me Too business model, you're just copying another business model and you can never up that game. You're basically competing with another Me Too. What you need to do is basically see different industry business model and how I can adopt it to my current state of how I can be very different delivery. So a lot of us focus only on just our core technology, not on how we deliver. But the execution is what is the most critical part, and the business model is the most critical part. Here are the different forms, the resource-driven, which is what Amazon does. So they have a core, but they constantly keep reinventing themselves. And it seems like there's no end to it. It's like a virtuous cycle. And that is where can we be one of those? Is it offer-driven? So I'm going to just go through, quickly scan through. Is it customer-driven? It's finance, which is a leasing model. So a lot of the firms are doing leasing model now, but these are learned from different industries, right? So Xerox did this. These manufacturing firms do it. So do look outside of your industry to see examples of how I can drive my current industry. So pivoting is a very important factor. Pivoting is basically how can I keep changing, like Samsung. Samsung started as a grocery store, but where are they now? So how many of these unicorns have pivoted? And just when we thought Netflix died, many of us thought that now Netflix is like such an amazing platform that it's changed, over time. And Netflix has again and again reinvented itself. So most of you folks may not know, it used to be a Dropbox sort of vending machine sort of, venture. And you had to go to Walmart to drop off these CDs, but now it is an online platform. It's really changed how this is delivered. So can we do that in healthcare? So there is no one-size-fits-all. That is what I wanted to say as well, that you cannot just say, okay, I'm going to do this, somebody else did it, and that's where you need to change what it's for you. It's very unique to your particular venture or firm. Some of these are the top M&As from, if you are aware of Pfizer, there was a big company called Warner Lambert. And even then, this was back in 2000, it did an M&A. It acquired this company for $106 billion. So in today's money, it would probably some couple of $1 trillion. And if you know the drug called Lipitor, that is what Pfizer acquired for Warner Lambert. And this, if you see, it is, even till now, there was a point when Lipitor was said that we'll put it in water, and that's how much money it made over years. So just wanted to give you a perspective on, some of the big M&As. This last one is a medical device firm. So medical devices are sort of a very smaller cousin of the pharmaceutical firms. And this is one of the latest, 2014 version. There's Takeda Pharmaceutical as well. So I wanted to say how some of these big acquisitions occur over time. So just to skip, to give you a little perspective of, so this is in the Indian healthcare. So these are some of the soon-to-be unicorns, so Soonicorns. So we all are so, we've heard about the Arvind Eye Care and the Narayana Health, but the newer, soon-to-be unicorns in India, the Practos, the Potias, the health cards. And some of these technologies out, the next to it are more product firms. So I wanted to highlight a lot of products because I know a lot of folks are still in the services mindset. So some of these product firms are Forest Healthcare, Janacare, Initio, this is a fertility marker. Janacare is a diabetes handheld, smartphone-enabled device. This pink one is from UV Life Sciences. It's a non-invasive breast cancer screening. So you do see the right graph is more on, skewed over which of these have got funded, but we do see a lot of the technology-based or, product-based firms have also been invested in, and they're also going to be leapfrogging soon. And this is where I want to end, is to leave a note to all of you that the future for healthcare for Indian firms is really bright, given the whole Make in India and the Ayushman Bharat push, which is the world's biggest initiative to support the healthcare. And this is where a lot of Indian firms, OEMs, are looking at the government's initiative and how each one of us can be involved, including startups here and a lot of the corporates here. So how can we utilize some of this to, provide the last mile coverage for the Indian population as well as move globally as well. So I just want to leave at that. And if there are any questions, happy to take that.
Thank you, Nita. It's good to know that Cyient being a niche in aero industry and coming into talking about business model of healthcare. How likely you are interested in terms of getting into the true healthcare activities? Because as we know, like Google, both the founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, both are genetically having vulnerability, and then they invest in California Life Company and other plenty of people investing billions of dollars into longevity studies. How willing Cyient is getting into being a kind of benchmark setting into coming into corporates into healthcare?
Sure. So Cyient is one of the few firms. So we do have a healthcare vertical. It's primarily, we have 8 different verticals from aerospace, utilities, transportation, semiconductor to healthcare. And healthcare, the firm invested in healthcare knowing how the industry is heading, and because it's a primary engineering firm, it's a heavy engineering firm. We make core devices, we make core engineering, if I may say, we also, so our bigger clients would be folks like GE, Philips, that's our client base. And we are cognizant of what's happening. We are working with the ecosystem. And I didn't talk about Cyient here because I wanted to keep it very open space here, is that we're working with the ecosystem. We've invested in startups. We work with bigger firms. We're creating an entire platform of what I was talking about, the ecosystem stakeholders. The platform is called, if you Google it, MedTech Connect. So this is where we're working with the government, with the startups in India, just to build the Indian ecosystem so that there is a whole platform for us to work on. There's no single platform which is doing that. And we realize there's a huge lacuna in terms of creating the different stakeholders so that there's this marketplace. Like Dr. Rakesh Mishra was saying that industry needs to come in. So industry is not being really forthcoming in that. So we want to create that so that industry becomes a critical part of commercializing or scaling some of these innovations.
Hello, ma'am. It was a wonderful presentation and quite informative for us. And I'm Dr. Vishnu Bharadwaj. I'm a final year. I'm an intern currently. And I have one major question, ma'am. As a student in medical college, we try to make a lot of things which are quite new technologies, and we get to see patients and we get to interact them on a more free basis, because once we get into profession, there are huge time limitations and all these things. And this has been a huge difficulty initially, and even now we had to cope up with lots of struggles, even to do a small research. And when I look at engineering colleges, the same thing is quite simple for them. There's a huge setup. Everything is readily available. Setup is available for them if they want to take up innovation as a part of their curriculum, academic curriculum. So how does medical students get such facilities, and are any platforms already working on that can make innovation simple for us?
Sure. So I think the great question. In fact, I wanted to cover that. So basically, what you highlighted is some of the issues that we have in India is that some of our universities or medical schools are not multidisciplinary. In US, you find these, or like a lot of other countries, you find that they're multidisciplinary universities where you crosstalk with medical schools, with business students, or with engineering students. And each of these are in silos in India. We don't see, so I think IIT Kharagpur is starting, and probably IIT Kanpur, where they're going to have medical schools within the engineering schools, and of course you have business schools there. So when you have some of these crosstalks, you really have some of the key elements like you said. So you're talking about equipment, but I'm talking about even information, right? So you talk to your engineering counterparts that, hey, this is a need that, is missing. I use these instruments, these medical devices, but this particular thing would have really changed it. So that's when your engineering colleagues would come in and they would say, hey, I think, I can help you. I didn't know this need existed. We can work this. But, just to give you a little perspective, I think if you're from Hyderabad, IIT Hyderabad, does a lot of cross-collaboration with medical students as well as some of the PhCs. So you might want to talk to some of the professors there. But definitely a great point, and I do know that that's a huge gap in our country, and I wish some of the newer universities which are being created should have these multidisciplinary institutions in place.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Aditi representing ASCII. I'm a little curious to know about one word which you used while doing the presentation, which is healthcare marketing. So while coming to the technology integration to healthcare, it is seen that it is very difficult to implement and more of financial crisis. So Make in India campaign and insurance like Ayushman Bharat, all these things, can we have this healthcare marketing as a catalyst to fill the gap of this financial crisis and take matlab the efforts forward and have a sustainable model in healthcare?
What do you mean by healthcare marketing? I didn't get it. I'm not
How
sure where
can
I
we
used it.
integrate the healthcare marketing with this to address the gaps of the financial funding or financial crisis and having a more sustainable model for our country actually, or the push?
So just to tell you, I mean, I'm actually a scientist, so I think we spend too much on marketing, not on the core technology or the business model. If you know that even, so if that's the marketing you're talking about, the pharmaceutical firm, when they say $1 billion is what is spent for the drug development, it's actually $800 million on, probably mostly marketing. And if there is press here, these are my personal views, so not to be quoted anywhere. But this is, so if you're talking about those marketing, I think people need to focus a lot on the technology and the business model. Marketing is, yes, an essential part because you need to have your customers aware or customers or people aware of what you're doing. So I think in that sense, when you're talking about Ayushman Bharat, yes, people are very, very well aware. I think what they want to see now is how it's going to be implemented, how it's going to be rolled out. I think that would be the more critical part. So it's wait and watch what's happening, especially with some of these initiatives.
Actually, it's interesting that you mentioned about IIT Hyderabad. Part of the entire effort of putting up the incubation center was done by my team as well. What I would like to know is that what sort of collaboration have you been able to establish with your healthcare vertical with the Vizag initiative that has happened there?
Yeah.
And also the Center of Excellence that we have also done at Bangalore for NASCOM.
Okay.
CardioTrack happens to be one of my mentees and a client, as well as the other devices that we are developing across the space. In Hyderabad, what sort of rapid prototyping facilities have you been able to build up? I was not aware that Cyient has got into this entire space. I was talking to Mohan long time back.
Sure.
Can you just give a quick outline as to what sort of facilities
so
that the students can look forward to?
Yeah, so the AMTZ, we're definitely in, I wouldn't say collaboration, but we are definitely in conversation with them. I think there's been a lot of change in the leadership there as well. So with Dr. Jitendra Sharma as well and Kinsuk. And IIT Hyderabad, yes, some of very good professors there have been in conversation. So depending on the need of what we are doing, we reach out to the academic partners, as well as we definitely know what's happening. And so it can't be, so I think what's also critical is when academic researchers, when they start developing a technology, if they think this is something I want to commercialize, so it shouldn't be that, hey, I have created this and, now industry take it up. It should be, if you're working on a, market need-based technology, it needs to be you see the technology, what's the need in the marketplace, and then start creating products in consultation with industry. Because what happens is that, I'm pushing the product. It's like one of the graphs that I'm talked about is that the universities push the technology, but there should be a market pull. But if very early on you have these mutual conversations, and that is where I think most of the firms now are having these conversations with the researchers, because we can't be doing the early stage research or early stage prototyping. We would be extremely happy when the academic partners or some of these incubators are creating technologies which the industry needs. So we are happy to collaborate with all of these, and I'm very aware of what's going on in each of these institutions. Yeah.
Initiated this particular program, I think are an ideal venue for you to create these bridges.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.